We are now on part 2 of Chapter 11, Administering Windows 7. In the last section, we looked at safe mode and last known good. But what if safe mode doesn't work and if last known good does not work? Well, then the next thing to do would be to boot to Windows RE, the recovery environment. To boot to Windows RE, you boot to the Windows 7 install DVD, but instead of selecting install, you run the system recovery tools. So if I boot to the DVD, instead of selecting install now, I select repair your computer. And when I do that, it loads a program called Windows RE, Recovery Environment. And from there, I can run startup repair. And what that does is it rewrites key boot files to the hard disk. I can run a system restore, which we will talk about in a few minutes. We can do a complete PC restore, and that is also called a system image backup. You can run the Windows Memory Diagnostic tool, or you can go to the command prompt. But what if you run Windows RE and you still can't boot to the hard disk? Well, you've done everything you could. Then you wipe the hard disk, you reinstall the operating system, and you perform a restore from backup, which we will do in a minute. But suppose you wipe the hard disk and you reinstall and it just doesn't take the operating system. Well, then that implies it's a bad hard disk. So if you've done all that and it still doesn't work, then get a new hard disk and reinstall the operating system and restore from backup. So ideally, we can boot normally and then run device manager and device rollback, driver rollback if necessary. But if we can't boot normally, we can boot to safe mode. If we can't boot to safe mode, we can try to boot to last known good. If we can't boot to last known good, then we boot to Windows RE, the recovery environment, and try to use the repair utilities to repair the operating system. And if that doesn't work, we wipe the disk and reinstall the operating system. And if wiping the disk doesn't do it, then it's time to get a new hard disk and to perform a restore from backup. The startup and recovery dialog box controls the dual boot screen. So if you have a computer which has multiple operating systems installed, in this example you can see Windows 7 and Windows Vista is installed, or you might have Windows 7 and Windows 2012 Server installed on the same computer. This is the Windows Boot Manager. So if you want to control that configuration, if you want to specify which one is to be the preferred operating system, you go into Control Panel, System and Security, under System and under Advanced Settings. Under Advanced, we see Startup and Recovery. And I click on Settings. And we see here System Startup, Default Operating System. So if you just turn the computer on, it would boot to Windows 7. But if you select the drop-down, then you can select earlier version of Windows which has been installed, such as Windows Vista, or in this example here, Windows 2008 Server. By changing this default operating system variable here, what that does is it defines which operating system is listed at the top of the boot manager. Page 424 discusses the System Configuration Tool. The System Configuration Tool can be used to disable all services, or it can be used to just disable one service. It's used in troubleshooting. So here's the situation. You think you have a faulty service. Could be anything. Let's just say it's the DHCP client. And you think that faulty service is preventing the normal boot. So what you want to do is disable that service and reboot and see if the problem goes away. And if the problem goes away, then you know it was that service, and then you've got to install a good version of that service. So if we click on Start and type msconfig, under System Configuration, you can see the next time we boot up, it will be a normal startup. But if I want to select Selective Startup, I can configure it such that the next time we boot, it will load all system services and it will load all startup items, services and startup items. Or I can choose not to load services and startup items. I could load no services and no startup items. Or I could specify that I want to, which services I do load, want to start, and don't want to start. If I think that perhaps that this is the service that is preventing this computer from starting normally, then I go in and I clear the checkbox for this service. In this example, it's the DHCP client. And I reboot, and if the problem goes away, then I know the problem is the DHCP client. Now, this is a Windows service. Let's hide all Microsoft services by clicking on this checkbox, and often it's third-party services which prevent the system from normally booting. So what you could do is clear one of these checkboxes to stop one of these services from starting up at the next boot up, to see if that's the service which is causing the problem. Now, also under the Startup tab, as you install more and more programs on your computer, it adds startup. So for example, on this computer, the Google Toolbar Notifier was installed. If I think that is interfering with a normal boot up, or I just want to get rid of it, I clear this checkbox. So the System Configuration tool allows us to selectively disable services and startup programs. Enable boot logging. Another way to diagnose boot problems is to create a boot log. And the way to create a boot log is you press F8 upon boot up. And you select Enable boot logging, and it creates an NT boot log. So when you go into the Safe and Advanced Boot options, you select Enable Boot Logging. And then what that does is it creates a boot log, and the boot log shows which drivers and services did and didn't load. And if the system freezes up, and then you go in and you look at that NT boot log, usually it's the last service or driver which loaded, which causes the system to freeze up. So NTBLOG is the boot log, and it shows all the services and drivers which load during the boot process. Branch cache, page 427, is when you are at, you've got one site, one office here, and they commonly connect to a remote office or to the main office. These people here are commonly connecting to the main office, and we can use branch cache. And if you look at the description for branch cache, we see that branch cache can decrease the time that branch office users spend waiting to download files across the internet. And then if you look at the details for that, increased branch office user productivity. When IT, that's us, when IT enables branch cache, a copy of the data accessed from an intranet website or file server is cached locally within the branch office. When another user tries to access the same file, then the user gets the file almost immediately because it's downloaded from the cache. So when the first user accesses a file, it's no faster. But when the second user accesses the same file, the second user accesses it much faster because it's downloaded from the local cache. To enable branch cache, we go into the Group Policy Editor, and then under Computer Configuration, under Branch Cache, we simply enable branch cache, and then under Set Branch Cache, Distributed Cache Mode, when we select that, we typically enable that. Then we see what that's going to do is this branch cache mode enables a client to retrieve content that has been downloaded and cached by another client. What that does is it speeds the access of the user's access to the data. Now let's look at performing backups. Everybody knows what a backup is. We have valuable data on the hard drive, and it should be backed up, so you can use Windows Backup. Windows Backup runs on a server, and it backs up the hard disk. And it can back up to DVD, it can back up to USB drive, it can back up to an external hard disk, it can even back up over the wire to the hard disk on another computer. But an interesting limit of Windows Backup is it doesn't back up to tape. And many large organizations like to back up to tape for large volumes of backup because a tape has a tremendous capacity. So if you do want to do a backup over the wire to tape, that's what they call an enterprise backup, to do an over-the-wire backup to tape, then you might use a Microsoft backup product under the Windows System Center. There is something called the Data Protection Manager, and the Data Protection Manager is Microsoft's enterprise backup software that allows you to perform backups over the wire to tape drives. So let's create a backup using Windows Backup, which is the backup operating system, backup program built into the operating system. I go to Control Panel, and under System and Security, I select Backup and Restore. Then I select Backup Now. Where do you want to save the backup to? I could back up to a hard drive, I could back up to a DVD, I could back up to a USB drive, I could back up over the network. If I choose to back up over the network, I would type in the UNC name of the server I was backing up to and of the shared folder that I was backing up to. If I wanted to just back up to the local E drive or external hard disk, I could select that, followed by Next. Then I specify what it is I want to back up. Now, it's not so important to back up the Windows 7 operating system because you can always reinstall that or just buy another copy of Windows 7. But what's really important to back up is the data files, the payroll and accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is a file. It's a list of all the customers, all your customers, and how much money they owe you. So it's very important to back up the data files. That's the most important thing to back up, is the data files. So I will back up the accounting folder, and then I can specify if I want this to recur on a weekly basis every day at midnight or every Friday at 10 p.m. followed by OK. These are my backup settings. Sounds good to me. I select Save Settings and run Backup. And then it proceeds to run the backup. Backup in progress. And there we go. Backup is completed. So the reason we do a backup is so we can do a restore, just in case the hard drive gets trashed or files get accidentally deleted. So to do a restore, it's the same process in reverse. You go into Control Panel, System and Security, into Backup and Restore, and you select Restore My Files. Then you select the media from where the files would be restored. And then you specify which backup you want to restore. Now, there's only one backup here to restore, so I click on OK. This backup is on the E drive, and the name of the folder which is backed up is called Accounting. So that's what I'm going to restore, the accounting folder. Where will I restore it? In the original location, which is typically where you restore to. I click on the Restore button, and then it restores the files and copies them back. And restoration is complete. So Windows Backup allows us to back up the operating system, to back up, most importantly, data files, and to perform a restore. Now let's look at page 435, creating a system image backup. The limitations of backing up only data is that it takes longer to restore. Well, it takes shorter to do. It takes less time to back up only the data, but it takes longer to restore because you've got to reinstall the operating system and reinstall the applications. But when you do a system image backup, it creates an image. And an image backs up everything which is on the hard disk. Data files, operating system, user accounts, applications, everything. And the big advantage is there is a one-step restore process. Just backing up the data files does not take very long, but it takes much longer to restore because you have to first install the operating system, then install the applications. But the advantage of system backup is it backs up everything and gives us a one-step restore process. To create a system image backup, where essentially we're taking everything that's on the hard disk and putting it onto a DVD. Under Control Panel, System and Security, Backup and Restore, we select Create a System Image. Then it says, where do you want to save the backup? And in this case, it's going to be to a DVD, and I will select my DVD drive, which in this case is the F drive. I click on Next. And which drives do you want to back up? And in this case, I want to back them all up. Not only the C drive, which has my operating system files, but the all volumes. And I click on Next. I confirm my settings and select Start Backup Now. And then it proceeds to copy the entire contents of the hard drive as an image to the DVD, and that takes a while to do. The system image backup copies everything from the hard disk as a single image to the DVD, and the big advantage is there is a one-step restore process. We talked about Windows RE earlier. So to create a system repair disk, what we're doing is we're creating a bootable DVD which contains Windows RE. So here's how you do that. We go into Control Panel, under System and Security, under Backup and Restore, and we select Create a System Repair Disk. Select the DVD, put the DVD in the drive, click on Create Disk, and then it creates a system repair disk. And then, and another way to do it is to create a Windows RE disk from the command line. So to do the same thing, just another way of doing it, is you can go to the command line, and if you type rec disk and press the enter key, it prompts you to put in the DVD, and that's another way of creating the system repair disk. So now that we have a system repair disk, let's boot to it, because that's the purpose of Windows RE. If you're having a problem booting normally to the hard drive, you boot to RE. So you put Windows RE, recovery environment, the boot disk in there, turn the computer on. When it says press any key to boot from the DVD, you press any key. And then these are the Windows recovery options which we looked at earlier. Startup and repair, which rewrites key boot files to the hard disk. System restore, which we have yet to discuss. System image recovery, and that is essentially the restore from the image that we could have created earlier. The image that we did create earlier. So I just mentioned system restore. Let's do it now. System restore, page 439. Now you already know what driver rollback is. If you have installed the wrong driver and you're sorry, you can use driver rollback and it rolls back that one driver. Well, let's say you started working on a computer at 9 o'clock in the morning and you changed one variable and another variable and another variable. And by the end of the day, you have that thing so screwed up, you say, I just wish I could put it back to the way it was at 9 o'clock this morning. Well, that's what System Restore does. System Restore is like driver rollback, but it rolls back all configuration variables, but it doesn't touch the data. So before you're going to start messing with a computer, it's a good idea to create a system restore point. To create a system restore point, we go to Control Panel, System Security, System, and we select Advanced System Settings. Under Advanced System Settings, we select System Protection, and right here we have Create a Restore Point right now for the drives that have System Protection turned on. So I click on Create, and it says give the restore point a name. I'll just call it point 1. I click on Create, and it says creating a restore point, and essentially what it's doing is making a backup of all configuration variables. The restore point was successfully created, and I click on Close. So then if I totally screw up the computer and I want to roll it back to a previous point, this is called applying a system restore point. So I go to the same place, Control Panel, System and Security, under System. Under Advanced System Settings, under System Protection, we have System Restore. You can undo system changes by reverting your computer to a previous restore point. I click on that. And then notice it says System Restore does not affect any of your documents, pictures, or personal files. It only rolls your system back, only rolls system configuration variables back. Click on Next. Then it says what restore point do you want to roll back to. Every time you create a backup, it creates a restore point. So you can see I created 2 backups previously, and those are the restore points. And here's the restore point I just created a minute ago. So I select that restore point, followed by Next. It says your computer will be restored. I say OK, and I click on Finish. And then it says don't touch it. And this can take a little while. And then it will reboot. And then when it reboots, you see this message that says System Restore Point has been successfully completed. Your documents have not been affected because System Restore Point only restores configuration variables. Restoring previous versions of a file. So here's the situation. A user creates a file, creates a data file on Monday. And on Tuesday he modifies it, and he modifies it again on Wednesday, and then he decides he wants Monday's copy of the file, and he wants you to go and pull out the backup programs, and you want to tell the user, well, don't you know how to do save as? So every time you have a different version, you can click on save as. Well, the user doesn't understand that. Well, here's what we can do. If we have enabled previous versions, here's what the user can do. To bring back versions which have been overwritten, the user goes to the file. Here's a file called report.doc. And if the user wants to roll it back to a previous version, this data file user right-clicks and selects Properties, and we have a tab that says Previous Version. And these are previous versions that we could select. So that would be Tuesday's versions, and that would be Monday's version. To enable previous versions, you go into Control Panel, System and Security, System, and when you go into System Protection, under System Protection, under System Protection Settings, you can select the radio button that says Restore System Settings and Previous Versions of Files. Or you could select only Restore Previous Versions of Files, but we're going to have both in this example. And then when you do that, then a user can bring back previous versions of files which he or she has overwritten. Summary. Part 2, summary. So in this part 2, we looked over disaster recovery, what to do if a driver rollback doesn't work. We looked at the startup and recovery dialog box. At the system configuration tool, we looked at Windows RE. At branch cache, we looked at Windows backup, at creating a system image, at performing and creating a system restore, and enabling previous versions. And in part 1, we discussed troubleshooting practices, troubleshooting tools, the Microsoft Management Console, remote desktop, remote assistance, PowerShell, the Windows 7 boot process, power on self-test failures, drivers and service failures, and booting to safe mode. And this concludes Chapter 11. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.